Alright, so here we go. In this video we're going to look at Algebra 1A and how we're going to do addition with numbers that we call integers. The first thing I'm going to do is some vocabulary just to make sure we understand what do we mean when we talk about integers. And if we start, before we define integers, if we go back a little bit, we define what is a whole number. And if a whole number, remember, it's a number that could be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. We could keep counting to infinity. But one thing to point out here with these whole numbers is that there are no decimals, there are no fractions, and also there are no negatives. And so decimals, that's another number system. Fractions, that's another number system. But when we have these negatives in here, if we decide to include negatives with the whole numbers, that's exactly what creates these things called the integers. So you could say that an integer is a whole number where a negative is allowed, like -3 would be an integer. So that's essentially what we have. Okay, so if you look here, you see all the whole numbers that we had originally. Here's your whole numbers, but then we also have these negatives mixed in here. So that's the addition, that's the extra part of the integers just being kind of put on there with the whole numbers. A great example of where we would use these negative whole numbers, these integers with the negatives on them, is with temperature. We are in Minnesota. I'm recording this in January. It's a very cold day today, and the high temperature is something like -3 degrees or something like that. So at least if you're familiar with cold temperature, you should be familiar with these negative numbers, what your textbook calls signed numbers, or your packet calls signed numbers. So to do addition with these, now that we understand what an integer is, to do addition with this, that's what we're going to look at. So one of the things I'm going to come back to later in the video is the following 4 problems, and to talk about how would you find the following sums. If you remember, sum in math means addition. That means we're going to add. And so how would you add here? 5 plus 2, well, that one I hope you could get. 5 plus 2 is 7. Those are just whole numbers. But what if we mix in some of these integers, some of these negatives? 5 plus -2, how do you do that? -5 plus 2, how do you do that? -5 plus -2, how do we do all these things? So you may already have an idea or a guess, and I welcome you to, if you want to pause the video, write these down. And then towards the end of the video we'll come back to these 4 specific problems, and we will address them. So as we often do in math, I want to examine here some patterns and see if we can find a rule or come up with a strategy looking through some patterns here. So I've got 4 addition problems written down, and these are 4 addition problems I hope you can do without a calculator. So starting with 5 plus 3, and I know my math facts. I know 5 plus 3 is 8, and then 5 plus 2 is 7, and then 5 plus 1 is 6, and 5 plus 0 is 5. So there we go. So now my question to you is, what comes next? Okay, so I'm looking for an addition problem, not just what is the addition problem, but then also what the answer is. So if you look at patterns here, if you notice we've got 5, 5, 5, 5. So the first number, the pattern, it's a very boring pattern, but the pattern here is that the first number is always 5. Another thing, we're always adding, so that's another boring pattern. First number is always 5, we're always adding, it was always 5 plus something. The second number here, we've got this pattern, we're going 3, 2, 1, 0. So now I go, okay, so what comes next? 3, 2, 1, 0. And if you think back to those integers or to your temperature or whatever, it's 3 degrees, now it's 2 degrees, now it's 1 degree, now it's 0 degrees. What comes next there? And then of course, what's the result going to be? We went 8, 7, 6, 5. So I'm going to put these up here. So there we go. So we've got, I put, 6 more problems here. And if you notice, I'm following this pattern. The first number is always 5, I'm always adding, and then I went 3, 2, 1, 0. minus 1 or negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, and negative 6. We could keep going, but we're gonna stop there. And then the results. So if we look at 5 plus negative 1, we might initially have no idea how to do this, but if we follow these patterns here, I go, look at this, the sum, the result of adding, it went from 8, then to 7, then to 6, then to 5. So if I keep following the pattern with these numbers, my answer reasonably is also going to follow the pattern. So 8, 7, 6, 5 next would be 4. So we'll make sense of why this is, but right now what we're coming up with is 5 plus negative 1 equals positive 4. 5 plus negative 2, well, if I continue the pattern here, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and then I'd have a 2, and a 1, and a 0, and then I'd get down to a minus 1 or a negative 1 here. So right now it might not make much sense to you as to why is it this way, but we have these patterns here. So 5 plus negative 1 turns out that is 4. 5 plus negative 2 is 3, positive 3. 5 plus negative 3 is positive 2, etc. 5 plus negative 5 is 0, and 5 plus negative 6 ends up giving us a negative result. Okay. So we'll talk about how to make sense of this, but in the meantime I'm going to keep going with some more patterns. So I've written a bunch more addition problems for us to take a look at, and again, if you notice, I have some patterns going on here. So I changed things up a little bit. So in this case I started every time with a negative 2 and then adding, and then I started with the second number being a 5, then decreasing to 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and getting into our negative. So we'll get here down towards the bottom. We'll get a negative number plus a negative number, and again, we might not understand why right now. We'll get there, but we'll at least see what we can do here. So for the first problem right here, negative 2 plus 5, I'm going to remember that addition has this thing called the commutative property. So the commutative property says, for addition, says that a plus b is equal to b plus a, essentially saying that the order that you add two numbers doesn't matter, the results are the same. So when I look here at negative 2 plus 5, I go, well, wait a minute, that's going to be the same as 5 plus negative 2. All I'm doing is I'm switching the order. I'm putting the negative 2 first and the 5 second. Here it was opposite. Positive 5 was first and negative 2 was second. So it's going to be the same result. It's still going to be a 3. And again, if it doesn't make sense to you right now, why it's 3, we'll get there. But now as I continue, so I go, okay, so if I start with the same number, but then I add 1 less, then my result should be 1 less. So negative 2 plus 5 is 3, negative 2 plus 1 less than 5 should be 1 less than 3, which is 2. And then negative 2 plus 1 less than 4 should be 1 less than 2. So negative 2 plus 3 should be positive 1. Negative 2 plus 2, if I follow this pattern now, 3, 2, 1, this is going to be 0. This is going to be negative 1, minus 2, minus 3, negative 4, negative 5, and negative 6. So again, it might still not make sense to you why we're getting the results we're getting. We'll make sense of that here in a little bit. But just so you can see those patterns. You could do this for yourself if you wanted to remind yourself what happens if I do negative 2 plus negative 4. Or 5 plus negative 6 or something like this. Okay? But now we'll talk about the reasoning behind this. So different people have different rules that they give for adding these integers, but I'm not going to get into that right now. To me, what I'm going to tell you when you're adding these integers is to think about money. So with money, if you are adding with a positive number, that positive number represents money that you have. And if you are adding, here we go, money you have for positive. And if you're adding with a negative number, you can't physically have negative $3. I can show you $3, but I can't show you negative $3. But instead I could say, oh, I owe $3. I'm in debt $3, or whatever that negative number is. I can think about it that I owe it, or it's debt. So to come back to those 4 problems I gave you earlier in the video, and to see now how can we make sense of this without looking at the patterns, is for me, I'm going to think about money. So for this first one, again, we hopefully can do 5 plus 2 without having to worry about these positives and negatives. This is just whole numbers. So 5 plus 2 equals 7. Whoops. There we go, sorry about that. 5 plus 2 equals 7. But if I want to see if it works in this with my positive numbers representing money I have, let's see how that would work. So it might seem silly for such an easy problem, but just to show you that it works, we could say with the positive 5, that represents that I have $5. Since it's positive, I have it. And we're adding the 2. The 2 is positive, so if it's positive, then I also have that. And when I combine that, when I put that together, if you have 5 and you have 2, you put that together, you have 7. And since you have it, it is positive. So this is a positive 7. I don't need the positive on my answer, but I can put that to emphasize. The next question now is, so this is where it gets a little more difficult, but let's think about having money or owing money. A positive number is money I have, negative number is money I owe. So positive 5 plus negative 2, think about that in terms of the money. So the 5 being positive, I have that, since it's a positive 5, whoops again, positive 5, I have it, and then the negative 2, because it's negative, I can say that I owe that. I owe my friend $2 or something like that. So, okay, when I combine this now, these will actually count against each other. You could think of this like subtraction, where we have the $5 and we're going to take away the $2 that we owe the friend. But when we do that, we come up here with that this is going to be positive 3. If I can squeeze that in there. Positive 3. I would still have money. Okay. And then, so moving on here to the next one. Negative 5 plus 2, if I put that in terms of money. Okay, so here we're switching things up a little bit. So the negative 5 would mean that I owe $5. And then the 2 is positive, so I have the $2. So maybe it's my friend, I owe $5, and I go to my friend and I say, hey man, I know I owe you $5, but unfortunately I cannot pay you everything I owe you. I have $2, so I can give that to my friend, and hopefully my friend will be nice enough and say, alright, I'll take the $2, but you still owe me $3. So let's make that 3 a little bit nicer. I would still owe my friend. I could pay $2, but I'm still going to owe $3. So I can't pay all of my debt, but I can pay some of it. So this can also be thought of as subtraction. You can say, well, I owe so much money, I can take away from what I owe. I can take $2 away from what I owe. I can pay the $2 I have, that takes away from what I owe. So the $5 I owe minus the $2 I have gets us down to $3, but we still owe it, so it's negative 3. And then the last one here, negative 5 plus negative 2. So here these are both negative, so both of them represent amounts that I would owe, if I think of it this way. I owe $5 plus I owe $2. So maybe I owe $5 to my brother, but then I owe $2 to a friend. You say, okay, well, those are separate people, but still, if I look at my financial situation, we can add those together and say, okay, well, I owe $7 altogether. So that's what we have there. So some people use a strategy where they talk about if both numbers are positive, add them. 5 was positive, 2 was positive, we added them, 5 plus 2 is 7. If both numbers are negative, this last example, it was negative 5 and negative 2, they were both negative, and we were adding them. Remember, this is the rule for adding. And we can add 5 plus 2 and get 7, but it was a negative and a negative, so we still have a negative. It was money we owe plus more money we owe resulted in more money we owe. So if they have the same sign, both positive or both negative, some people say go ahead and add the numbers and keep the sign. A positive plus a positive was a positive, negative plus a negative was a negative, and we just added the 5 and the 2. When the numbers were opposite signs, when one was positive, when one was negative, like here 5 plus negative 2, or negative 5 plus positive 2, you have one of each sign, positive and negative, and we said it's like subtraction. We really did 5 minus the 2, and then how do we know if it should be a positive 3 or a negative 3? Well, you look at the bigger number. So it was a positive 3 here, and the 5 was positive, 5 is bigger. Negative 3 here, and the 5 was negative, the 5 was bigger. So you can think of it that way, you just have to be careful with that. But this is really my strategy to think about money. This is the way I like to do it. please make sure you get lots and lots of practice with this. Get really good at adding the integers, and keep in mind that this is the addition. When we do subtraction, it'll be a different rule or a different strategy. When we do multiplication, when we do division, that'll be different. So what we're doing right here is only for addition.